he made mankind, that it hurt him in his heart. Okay. All right, let's flip the page to page 88. Pre-flood, humankind hitting bottom is how I'm defining this. What we're going to have in Genesis 6, my spirit will not contend in paragraph 1. We're going to talk about the Nephilim in paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 is the I will wipe out mankind, and it ends with but Noah. But Noah. When man began to increase in number on the earth, this is Genesis 6, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married anyone they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120. Now we already know that numbers are not just numbers. There's a significance behind it. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God went to the daughters of men, they had children by them. These were the heroes of old, men of renown. That's an interesting phrase. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination in the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Notice the extremes. How great man's wickedness on the earth had become, that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Very extreme words there, right? The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth. His heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, birds of the air, for I am grieved that I made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Look at that picture in the bottom page.
Wow. Is this a little, what do you call it, playing around with
A
it?
little Photoshop?
Yes.
I don't know. That picture is when you look up Nephilim on the internet, this is what you get. It's on the internet, so it must be true. So,
Oh,
giants, and yeah, now you're starting to
I
get
know, I
it.
didn't see that.
I didn't see the two guys.
The two little guys
Well,
there.
didn't they find one of these just recently?
Did they?
I don't know. It's Photoshop.
What am I missing?
There's little guys
Two little guys. Do you see the two little guys up against
that
the
are cleaning
giant?
the statue. The
Guys
ones
in
in white
white.
shirts.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it took me a minute.
They weren't, I was looking for another skeleton.
Ah.
Okay.
Now, in order to understand this passage, we need to understand how God relates to humans in the ancient Near East. Okay, now this just isn't the Bible. We're moving on to page 89. How God relates to humankind. Okay, remember, in order to understand the passage, you have to go back in time and figure out what it meant to them at that time. When the Israelites, at that time, heard this story of the Nephilim and heard how bad mankind was, and heard the sons of God, and heard the daughters of men, what did they hear? How did they understand it? Okay, you need to go back, and then we can translate it and hopefully figure it out for us, because it's confusing when we look at it. In fact, most people just skip over this because it's too hard to explain, that they don't understand it. So first thing we need to do is understand how God relates to mankind in the ancient Near East. Okay, during Egyptian times, during Mesopotamian, Akkadian times, all right? Number one, and probably the most prevalent, is that God relates to mankind through sex. Okay? Now you all studied enough Greek to know all the Greek myths, right? Where there's half men, half gods, because one of the gods came down and did what they had to do and all this kind of stuff, all right? Greek mythology is based on Hittite mythology, which is based on Akkadian mythology. Okay? So that has been passed on, that kind of relating of God to man. All of these had myths of God coming down and relating to humans through sex. In fact, on all the Egyptian walls, for those of you, the majority of you have been in Egypt.
Hey.
Got 3 that have been, well, you've been there too. Dee, you're going to have to go with me next time. You're the only one that really hasn't gone to Egypt. But on the walls, in order to verify their kingdom, especially at Hatshepsut's temple in Deir el-Bahari, she had things on the temple where her parents, the god and her mom, got together, and Hatshepsut was the result. Okay, they have actual pictures of that. Okay, it's a very typical thing in the ancient Near East. It's part of personifying the gods. Many included temple rituals, which culminated in sex with the gods through temple prostitutes or even statues or sculptures. Okay, we find that with all the archaeology. We see it on the walls in Egypt. We find it in Canaan, in Akkadian and Mesopotamian. All right, so God relates to man the first way through sex of some kind. Number 2, God relates to mankind through the deification of man. So it's not God coming down to man, it's man going up to God and being able to be a God himself. And that's what the Pharaoh was, right? In all ancient Near East contemporary societies, again, Egyptian and Mesopotamian, Akkadian, had myths or epics of man becoming God. We're going to be talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh next week. Okay, and that's about a man becoming God. Imhotep in Egypt. If you were at Saqqara, where we looked at the step pyramid that was built by Imhotep, and later Imhotep was worshipped as a god. He became a god, and of course all other pharaohs as well. It makes the gods more personable and attainable. Implied in the Tree of Life epics. Okay, when you talk about the Tree of Life, it talks about that humans can attain that eternal life. Right? Okay, that's what the Tree of Life signifies, is the eternal life, becoming God or God-like. It adds a sense of duty, obligation, or even a goal toward being good, so that I can become a god. Okay, it sounds like Mormon.
But the Tree of Life, it was the lie, it wasn't an implication, was it?
What do you mean, it was the lie?
It was the serpent's lie.
Oh, the Tree of Knowledge was the serpent's lie. The Tree of Life, God was also in the garden. That signified that Adam and Eve were eternal until the fall. We're going to talk about that because they were cast out of the garden away from the Tree of Life. Okay. Number 3, so God relates to man through sex, through deification of man, and through dreams and visions. All ancient Near East contemporary societies had myths or epics or even dream books in Egypt of messages from God. Dreams and visions are a mystery. God is a mystery, so they must go together. Why else would we have them? Okay, there's a sense that when you're dreaming, and in fact the dream books in Egypt would give you an interpretation. So say you dreamed of falling off a mast of a ship, okay, and that meant good fortune in your crops. Something like that. So they would actually, okay, you come with a dream and they'd look up that dream in the book, okay, falling off a mast from a ship, and oh, that means this and this.
But we do that today too with,
Yeah, I have
Absolutely.
3 books.
yeah.
Absolutely, right? So we relate to that. Dreams and visions or mystery, we talked about that. Connected with temple dream rooms, with incense and drug usage. Think the oracle at Delphi, okay? And prophets and soothsayers. All of those are involved in this godlike thing. Connected to pyramids and stairways and ziggurats. That's how God relates. How did Joseph see the stairway to heaven? It was in a dream. And when you talk about pyramids, they're the way that you can go up and down to God. That's how you go up and talk to God. That's how you get down to God. The same concept with the ziggurats. Okay, they're part of that dreams and visions. Number 4, God relates to mankind through the give and get, give to get, of sacrifice or blood. All ancient Near East had rituals of sacrifice or blood to appease the god. Okay, you wanted to stop a famine, you wanted to stop a storm, or eliminate a famine, or prepare for war. So you gave all your sacrifices to appease the god to give you success. or something you needed or wanted. If you wanted wealth, you'd give a certain sacrifice at a certain time to a certain god. If you wanted children, you'd give a certain sacrifice at a certain time to a certain god. Simply good results from financial decisions, if you wanted that. Okay? So all of these are all through the ancient Near East. God relates to mankind through sex, through deification of man, through dreams and visions, and then through sacrifice. Then, I see you already flipped the page, getting a little ahead of me there. Page 90, the fifth and final way is totally unique and exclusive to Israel. God relates to mankind through covenant relationship. Okay? It's radically new to the ancient Near East. No other culture had this at that time. A marriage relationship or a family relationship as a metaphor. God says, you are my children, right? Or he says, you are unfaithful to me, like in a marriage relationship. It introduces love into the relationship. All these others have nothing to do with love, including sex, right? It has nothing to do with love. The covenantal relationship does. God laughs, God cries, God is pained, as we talked about. Sometimes God is unsure, God is jealous, God is angry. All emotions to add emphasis to that relationship. It explains how God relates to us, and he personifies God for us in this relationship. God relates to us through relationship. Now, a lot of you have said that it's kind of disappointing. It's like Judy, who's not here today, but she had mentioned to me before that she's kind of feeling the power is sucked out of Scripture, knowing that somebody wrote the same thing before. That Genesis 1 was based on the Enuma Elish, and that Genesis 2 was based on Egyptian mythology, and all this other stuff. And she says that kind of draws the power. Well, for me, what I see is, okay, what's different? This is totally new, totally different, exclusive to the Bible. Covenant relationship. No other culture at that time had a covenant relationship with their God. They had covenants, they had contracts, they had things without that sense of love and relationship in it, but the writers of the Bible rejected the first two ways that God relates. They did that through Scripture. First, God related to mankind through deifying mankind was not allowed because the Sphinx was guarding access to the tree of life. Kept them away from the tree of life. Put a cherub in front of it, an angel, a flaming sword, all of that in front of the tree of life to keep Adam and Eve away. So that was a rejection of that mythology that God relates to man by man deifying mankind. It was rejecting that. Genesis 6 rejects the other one. Number 1, God relating to mankind through sex was evil and led to total depravity. Genesis 6. Okay, so the first thing, when you understand how God related, you understand how this chapter is starting to form that my spirit will not contend. I will not have a relationship with these. But Noah. So you understand this covenant is being built between my spirit will not contend and with Noah. But Noah found grace, not a relationship, in the eyes of the Lord. Okay?
Am I oversimplifying this, Steve, or is this just a way to look at it, that this is Satan's twist on the whole plan of, because of the fall, but on the whole
God
picture.
relating to man.
Yeah.
He wants to corrupt that.
Right, and he certainly was successful. Now, the word sphinx that you put in there, that's a Steve definition of sphinx for Genesis.
Well, it's a Fox definition, but yes. Fox translates it.
Can you
Literally,
clarify
cherub,
that for me again? I know you said it before, but
cherub is the name, which we translate as cherubim or cherubim. Okay, cherub starts with a K, but in Hebrew, stance means winged guardian.
Okay, so I have to be careful that in my mind, I don't see, um, the Sphinx in Cairo,
Okay.
right?
Well, the
I mean, I
purpose
don't
of the
confuse
Sphinx.
it with that, I
the
don't,
purpose,
right.
The purpose of the Sphinx is to guard the holy, guard the sacred. That's why you find Sphinx in front of temples, you find them in front of the pyramids. So the
Okay.
purpose is the same now, if you want to picture the Sphinx over
Okay,
there.
but
in
that
front of the
confuses
Luxor or
my
whatever.
feeble little brain.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
But
thank
you
you.
have to understand, according to Fox, this winged guardian is all over the tabernacle. If you look at the descriptions of the tabernacle, all the curtains that were hung have pictures of Sphinx on them, protecting around the Holy of Holies and
Cherubim,
around
I prefer.
the Holy cherubs. Okay.
Okay,
All right, so let's get into the literary nuances. So the first thing you need to know about Genesis 6 is that it is saying God does not relate to man through sex. Okay, through sex of any kind. All right, so let's look at the literary nuances, the playing with words. Paragraph 1 is the focus of mankind. Notice it begins and ends with mankind. When man began, or mankind began to increase in number, and daughters of mankind were beautiful, and my spirit will not contend with mankind forever. Okay, all of these brings the focus of that first paragraph to mankind. That's the focus. And what happens to mankind in that focus? The focus then was on the increase, okay, that they increased on the earth. That's how it started, which was good and natural. In fact, God told them to do that, right? Go into the world, populate the world. And then the beauty, but a better translation is comely. A lot of versions will have that the daughters of men were comely. Comely. Okay, even that's not a good, that gives us almost a homey kind of look that the people are. But that literally means open and available. Okay? Open and how the daughters of mankind were open and available, which indicates a falling of some kind. Okay, from this being fruitful and increasing to they're starting to get a little open and available. They're starting to get a little, what's a good way to put it? They're starting to get a little depraved in what's going on. Okay, then commingling with the sons of God, where they married. Okay, that again is in quotes, but it literally means they took what they wanted, and ends with God limiting the age. Okay, so you have, in this first paragraph, you have a total denigration of mankind that starts with being fruitful, and then depraved, and then doing, actually depraved might be better here when they started taking the sons of God. Depraved, so kind of open, and then ends with God being, God being frustrated, or God being angry, or God being grieved, and then grieving God, or extreme. We already see that in that first paragraph. Okay? They took all they wanted, they ended up limiting. We're going to talk about the age in just a minute. We'll get to that. Sons of God, in quotes. What does that mean? Most of the time when you see Son of God, and in the Bible, it doesn't mean the Son of God, unless you get to the New Testament, it means more angels. If you see that in the Old Testament, it usually means angels of some kind. So, a different species, as Gail would put it. I'm still not sure that's the right way. I don't know. It could be angels. It could be, I've heard before, that Abel's line was the line of God, and Cain's line was the line of man. Okay, and they started working together when they were supposed to be separate. They started building their own nation together. It could be other gods, small g gods, or even other interpretations. I've heard them all.
that's interesting when you say that could have been Abel's line, because maybe, again, hypothetically.
I'm sorry, Cain's line versus Seth's line. Right? Abel was killed. So it'd be
Oh,
Cain's
yeah,
line versus
okay.
Seth's
Oh, okay, that's right, okay. That destroys what I was saying. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
But if that were the meaning, then that really does establish why God had to just choose Abraham out of all of mankind at that point.
Yeah, yeah, because there was no distinction
Yeah.
at this point. That distinction is gone. After we find out about the, when it comes to Lamech and Lamech, part of that is an implication that they're intermingling again. We have the V-Lamech. Now don't get caught up on the name. What they're saying is, it's down to wild man.
The depravity, yeah.
The wild man, yeah, the depravity of mankind.
Wow.
When both genealogies end with Lamech, wild man, that's what his name means. Or literally wild ass is what it is, wild donkey. Okay, that's what it literally means. So they both ended up there. So it could be angels, Cain's line, I'm sorry, so I put it wrong there, that should be Seth. That's why. Seth's line
Not
versus
Abel, but
Cain's
Seth.
line. Right. Other gods, even the answer is not given, therefore, it's not important. The point of the narrative is important. This depravity, that we're going from being fruitful and multiplying to the point where we're getting extreme depravity and frustration. That's the whole focus of this narrative, and you'll see each one of these paragraphs are emphasizing that man is becoming more and more depraved. Okay? A nod on page 91. Now this is interesting because again, we don't catch the nuances of ancient Hebrew. We don't catch the subtleties of when I say to mom, my mother-in-law is here, when I say to my mom, I say, I love you, or I love you. We don't catch those nuances in language. So what they do is they try to give you cues in the writing, and remember this is a oral tradition. So when I made the point earlier, before you guys got here, that there's a passage where Sarah says some words in Genesis, and we'll get to it. And in the Hebrew, it's a joke. It's a play on words that people would literally laugh from, but we don't see that. There's a couple of those in Genesis. For instance, the name of Rachel means ewe, E-W-E, right? Female lamb. Okay, that's what Rachel means. Okay, so when Isaac's servant is going to, when Jacob is going and he goes to the well and he's looking for his uncle Laban, and he says, asks the people at the well that are feeding their sheep, where's his uncle Laban? The servants there say, well, here comes you with the ewes. Okay, and as opposed to say, here comes Rachel with her sheep, is how it's translated. Well, we don't get that. That here comes you with the ewes. And the same thing with Sarah. Sarah says, Sarah said, will a person as old as me suckle a child? Well, what it should be is, Sarah uttered, will I utter a child? Okay, so that's that kind of language stuff we just don't catch in English. All right, and it's the same thing here with this passage. Okay, because you're getting this tongue-in-cheek kind of thing going on, the nuances here. Okay, so it's a nod to contemporary mythology, but a denigration of it, making a point that, okay, here's Steve's translation, you crazy pagans believed all your heroes of old were half men and half God. Well, even by that scenario, you have to understand that it's caused by corruption and the downfall of man, and not a good thing. The heroes of old, men of renown, was a tongue-in-cheek comment that could just as easily be translated, these were the big bullies who thought they were important. Okay, heroes of renown, those who make a name. You hear the noun name in there? That word renown means making a name for yourself. Okay, they thought they were important. They're the big bullies that thought they were important. Okay, so it's like this nod to mythology saying, you guys believe this crazy stuff? That these half men, half God existed? Well, they're totally depraved. Even if that did happen, the whole world is totally depraved because of it. They're just big bullies who thought they would make a name for themselves. All right? Verse 4, and again, that if you read Alter, if you read Fox, If you, there's a couple other classes that I've taken on Genesis that says the same thing. It's a nod to the people of that age. And again, you as hearers in the ancient Near East would know all these other myths from Acadia and from from Egypt. You would know all these. And so I'm saying to you, okay, that's fine. If you want to believe that, but they were just big bullies, trying to make a name for themselves. And they were all wiped out, which is what everybody knows the next chapter is going to be. Verse 4, went to the daughters of men. Okay, it's another word for a kind of sex in ancient Hebrew. There are 3 Hebrew phrases for having sex. Okay, the first one, and we get all 3 of them in Genesis. Genesis 4 verse 1, we talked about that, was it last week or the week before? Adam knew Eve. The Hebrew is yada eth, eighth. He knew above, or took control, or dominated her. Okay, that's the first way. Okay, it's not the extreme that we're going to get to in a minute, but that's the first way that sex is, and that's where you hear it, Adam knew Eve. But then in Genesis 4:25, Adam lay with Eve again. It's yada, so it still has that no in it. Yada aud, knew again, or knew with, or shared with, or laid with. You can see a mutual understanding here. So in Genesis 4, we see the growth of Eve. When Eve had Cain, she said, look what I have done. I have created a man just like God, when Cain was born. And then Seth was just kind of, or Abel was just kind of an afterthought, right? Because his name meant mist, or wisp, or kind of an afterthought. So Cain, I have created just like God. Well, then you have the whole experience of Cain and Abel, and then Seth being born at the end of chapter 4, where Adam and Eve laid again, and Seth was born, and his name means granted, or gift of God. So you can see the translation of Eve, right? Where she says, I have done this, to this is a gift of God. So you see that transition, but you also see it in the kind of sex they had. Okay, from Adam dominating Eve to Adam and Eve having a mutual thing going on in 4:25.
Is that in a sense in there a little bit that man is the head of the house?
Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah. Well, but I mean it's pictured.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, because it doesn't give man, meaning male,
right,
dominance to the point where he can.
Right, and in fact that was taken away.
Right.
He did it at first, and Cain was the result, and then they were together. It was a mutual thing. This yada aud, shared with. And then comes Genesis 6 verse 4. Sons of God went to the daughters of men. Now if you have King James translation, it says went to unto. It's almost like 2 prepositions to show it. Went to unto. Went unto to the daughters of men. Either one of those 2. Now that is the Hebrew ba'al ba'ath. Invaded. Stolen. Infiltrated. Came into, violence, rape, even used for spiritual possession in extra-biblical documents. Other Hebrew, if you look through the Bible, that same ba'al ba'ath, other Hebrew and extra-biblical usage for in invading armies, entering and pillaging. Okay? So you kind of get the concept of the 3 different kinds that's going on here. It's not, 4 verse 1 isn't as bad as the 6 verse 4. But this is totally just coming in and invading and tearing apart relationship, pillaging relationship. All right, so you understand again this depravity that's coming. My spirit will not content. All right, so he is mortal, corrupted, meaning corrupted, and his days will be 120. Numbers mean something. Numbers mean something. Now, there's a couple of different ones, and nobody knows for sure. Okay, 3 times 40. 40 is a number of testing. Only 3 periods or testings in life. From this time on, especially if you read in Proverbs and other Hebrew literature, you only have 3 phases in life. You have young men, men, and old men. If you've read through Proverbs, you'll see that all over Proverbs. You see it all over Psalms. It's like there are 3 periods in life. You have young men, men, old men. Okay, and the same with women. Okay, you have virgins, which doesn't mean no sex. It's more of an age thing. Okay, and then you have women or wives, and then you have widows. It's divided into 3. So that's the most likely explanation. That I'm not going to contend with all of this. They just are going to go through a young period, a middle age, and an old period. Actual 120 years maximum age. It's less likely, but that could be what they mean. Okay, most likely it was 3 times 40. People are guessing that it's 10 times 10. Remember last time we talked about 10 times 10 times 10 equaling 1,000 was the number of perfection, human perfection, where 7 is the number of spiritual perfection, but 1,000 is the right number. Okay, so that's why Noah is 500 years old before he gives birth. He's at that half perfection. He's the only one that's on his way. Okay, so you have 10 times 10 signifying that it's not quite the perfect age. It's missing one of those 10s. And then 20 signifying God will not be contested. That's my spirit will not contend, will not last for 40 years. So I'm only going to do 20 years. 40 years is that testing, that contending. So it's almost, you can see it in the language, that contending equals 40 years. Moses wandered for 40 years. Jesus was out in the wilderness for 40 days. Moses was out in the wilderness by himself for 40 years, and then they wandered the desert for 40 years is the number of testing or contending. All right? So, but that's guessing. There's no extra biblical or biblical background for that 10 times 10 plus 20. It's just kind of insinuated in the language. All right, so the extreme words show extreme view of God toward sin. Great man's wickedness had become every inclination and only evil all the time. Again, you can hear that as somebody is reading that to you. They would do the same kind of emphasis that I would put on it. That every inclination, though, is always evil all the time. All right, again, what we're showing is, again, the depravity. The Nephilim. We already discussed the name itself. We're on page 92. The name itself means fallen ones or giants. We really don't know what the Hebrew word Nephil means. All we have to go on is the Septuagint version of the Bible, written around 200 BC, which translated into the Greek as gigantos, which is a form of the pre-Greek gigant, or what we would call giant, or large ent. Ent.
A tree.
Yeah. If those of you of Lord of the Rings fame would know that the large ents are large trees. Now that's J.R.R. Tolkien taking a little freedom with ancient words, because nobody knows what an ent is. A gigant, a giant, we don't know what it is. It's a big something. We don't know what it is. So we translate it as a huge human. But, so what the Septuagint did, this is in 200 BC, again, it relates to Egypt, because the Ptolemies in Egypt wanted to have the best library ever in Alexandria. So what they did is they found the Jews to make a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so you following me so far? So they found 70 Jewish scholars, brought them all to Alexandria, and they asked them to sit down and make a Greek, because Ptolemy is Greek, from Alexander the Great, and they conquered everything, right? And Ptolemy was one of his generals that took over Egypt. They're building this great library in Alexandria, so he brought in 70, which is Septuagint, right? He brought in 70 Jewish scholars to translate. When they translated from the Hebrew, the Nephil, they translated it into the Greek gigantos, giant. So that's the only thing we have to go on as to what a Nephil really is. We don't really know. It means fallen one. Fallen ones. The Lord was grieved, filled with pain. So now we're getting to the last paragraph here. Notice, I want you to notice a few things here. Notice the transition from God to Lord. Lord did not come about until Moses, right? Moses on the tree, when he said, I am that I am. It should all be caps here, but I put it in caps, but if you go to the NIV train that I have on there, it's lowercase Lord, but it's Yahweh. So that's how we know. Now a lot of those NEDP, remember when we talked about the different theories that said the first 5 books were written by 4 different authors? And they said the reason why is the first part of Genesis 6 calls God God. That last part of Genesis 6 calls God Lord, Yahweh. So the J, the Yahwehists, versus the Elohists, the E, that they must have combined their stories together and put this, well, no, that's not what it is. It shows again a translation of a relational God. That's the relationship God. From Lord, from the Lord, or from God to the Lord, that covenantal God. Notice the contrast with Noah's name. Peaceful and rest, he will comfort us in our labor and painful toil. Last week, in Genesis 5, in the genealogy, it says that Lamech gave birth to Noah because he will comfort us in our labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. Genesis 5:29. It's all about relationship. Note, contrast that with what the Lord says. The Lord was grieved. Okay, it says the Lord was grieved, and Noah will take away that grief, that he will comfort us, that pain, and he was pained that he had made man. That all of his was all the time. So that Noah's name satisfies God's hunger, or Noah's name satisfies that grieving, that pain in God, because he will comfort that grief. Notice the inclusio in the pericope is relationship. Inclusio is how it begins, and how it ends. Okay? My spirit will not contend, will not be tested, will not fight, battle, judge with man, but Noah found what? He found grace, acceptance, favor, closeness. Okay? So it shows that how bad man was becoming, but Noah. But Noah.
Gives an added perspective on the flood, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So now we're set up for the flood. That's the whole purpose of this. I mean, we have to understand why God wiped out mankind, because everything was evil all the time. But Noah. But Noah.
And Steve, I can't help but think, at home, somebody was with a youth group and wanted to was stressing the word sin. And these kids they did not know. And he thought they were pulling his leg first, but they did not know sin. I mean, they could not define it, how that has been erased again, and how this fits.
Fits with our salvation.
It does.
Right? You have to understand how totally depraved you are in order to understand how much grace you were given.
Yeah.
You have to get that. Okay? You have to, and that's what the author of Genesis, whether you believe Moses or whoever, the author of Genesis 6 is saying, this is how great our sin was. Every inclination of every thought of our heart was evil all the time. No good. But Noah. And we will find next week, when I define, if you look at, I'm going to ask you what does the ark mean, see if you can find ark. But this is a type of Christ, ark. The ark is a type of Christ. We're going to talk about that next week, okay? Because that's what saves us from this. Okay? It's very much relates to New Testament Jesus. Because it saves us from this. But before we get on to next week, so what did it mean to them back then, and how does that translate into us? When you read Genesis 6 now, I hope you have a good perspective on it. Okay, it's crazy stuff, but you understand that it's a nod saying God does not relate through coming down and having sex. Okay, that's not our God. If that happens, what you see is this total depravity growing and growing and growing. And we have to understand how bad our sin and misery is. How bad our sin and misery is. That's the focus of this narrative. All these details, remember? And I've been talking to my mother-in-law about rule number 1. What is the focus of the narrative? What is the point of the passage? What are they trying to say? Everything else is interesting, but that's not the point. That's not the part that's inspired. It's the point, the focus, the purpose of this narrative. It's telling us how depraved we are, but Noah, but Jesus. Okay, which we can infer as Christians one step further from them there. All this depravity we're talking about here, but Noah, but Jesus. Okay, that's what it translates into us. That's the point, the focus of the narrative. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Look at that picture in the bottom page.
Wow. Is this little, what do you call it, playing around with
A
it?
little photoshopped?
Yes.
I don't know. That picture is when you look up Nephilim on the internet. This is what you get. It's on the internet, so it must be true. So,
Oh,
giants, and yeah, now you're starting to
I
get
know, I
it.
didn't see that.
I didn't see the two guys.
The two little guys
Well,
there.
didn't they find one of these just recently?
Did they?
I don't know. It's Photoshop.
What am I missing?
There's little guys
Two little guys. Do you see the two little guys up against
that
the
are cleaning
giant?
the statue. The
Guys
ones
in
in white
white.
shirts.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, it took me a minute.
They weren't, I was looking for another skeleton.
Ah.
Okay.
Now, in order to understand this passage, we need to understand how God relates to humans in the ancient Near East. Okay, now this just isn't the Bible. We're moving on to page 89. How God relates to humankind. Okay, remember, in order to understand the passage, you have to go back in time and figure out what it meant to them at that time. When the Israelites, at that time, heard this story of the Nephilim and heard how bad mankind was and heard the sons of God and heard the daughters of men, what did they hear? How did they understand it? Okay, you need to go back and then we can translate it and hopefully figure it out for us because it's confusing when we look at it. In fact, most people just skip over this because it's too hard to explain that they don't understand it. So first thing we need, he made mankind, that it hurt him in his heart. Okay. All right, let's flip the page to page 88. Pre-flood, humankind hitting bottom is how I'm defining this. What we're going to have in Genesis 6, my spirit will not contend in paragraph 1. We're going to talk about the Nephilim in paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 is the I will wipe out mankind, and it ends with but Noah. But Noah. When man began to increase in number on the earth, this is Genesis 6, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married anyone they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120. Now we already know that numbers are not just numbers. There's a significance behind it. The Nephilim were in the earth, and what we need to do is understand how God relates to mankind in the ancient Near East. Okay, during Egyptian times, during Mesopotamian, Akkadian times, all right? Number one, and probably the most prevalent, is that God relates to mankind through sex. Okay? Now you all studied enough Greek to know all the Greek myths, right? Where there's half men, half gods because one of the gods came down and did what they had to do and all this kind of stuff, all right? Greek mythology is based on Hittite mythology, which is based on Akkadian mythology. Okay, so that has been passed on, that kind of relating of God to man. All of these had myths of God coming down and relating to humans through sex. In fact, on all the Egyptian walls, for those of you, the majority of you have been in Egypt.
Hey.
Got 3 that have been, oh, you've been there too. Dee, you're going to have to go with me next time. You're the only one that really had those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God went to the daughters of men, they had children by them. These were the heroes of old, men of renown. That's an interesting phrase. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination in the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Notice the extremes. How great man's wickedness on the earth had become, that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Very extreme words there, right? The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth. His heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, birds of the air, for I am grieved that I made them. But